Taking a break from politics in this episode, I want to focus on a silent problem growing by the day in the West. A problem that colors the imagination of the Western mind against Indians, more specifically Hindus, and not entirely in a complimentary way. The problem I am referring to is that Hindus are fast becoming for many in the West the Jews of pre-Second World War. What do I mean by that? Pre-Second World War, it was not only Germany that discriminated against the Jewish community. There is a popular and totally erroneous perception that the atrocities and humiliation inflicted on the Jews was only the handiwork of the pre-war German Nazi regime. Fact of the matter is that hatred for the Jews was deeply entrenched in much of England, France, and many other European nations, and even the United States. In a similar manner, today, a wave of hatred is engulfing many Western nations against Hindus. To be fair, this was not the case earlier. Hatred for the Jews in certain quarters is centuries old, its roots going deep in ossified religious belief. But hatred for the Hindu is relatively a new phenomenon. What is causing this upsurge in this hatred? Where does it stem from? And most importantly, who are the architects of this hatred? I will discuss all that in a minute, but first, a warm welcome to all viewers of the CAA show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis, and my name is Juggi Bhasin. To watch this video podcast, press the big red subscriber button on your screen. Subscription is, of course, completely free. In the past, there was such a thing known as the Hindu rate of growth. It signified torpor, sluggishness, and an acceptance of anything and everything thrown at you. The world was comfortable with that, and honestly, so also was a sizable chunk of the Indian intellectual class. The world would dismiss India with the words that the country has potential, but they are too set in their ways, too unambitious and enfeebled to make real progress. But post-liberalization, the all-suffering, all-embracing, too slow to react Indian was slowly shedding skin, and after 2014, the acceleration was rapid. Finally, there was a man at the helm of affairs who restored pride in Indians of not only their past, but gave them the confidence of what they were capable of doing in the present and in the future. Today, from a Hindu rate of growth, the country has transformed to having the highest rate of growth in the world. The contours of the country are changing rapidly. And this breathless change leaves many fuming and unhappy. Now hold your breath and I will tell you of this miserable lot who fueled this wave of hatred against Indians, especially the Hindu community. And these people are Indians themselves, especially Indian academics and journalists working abroad, ensconced in Western universities. This lot was most comfortable with the old order, when having studied and taught abroad, they would come back to their native country and were given a hero's welcome. But post-liberalization, in a rapidly industrializing world, when they came back, there were no takers for their pearls of wisdom, their diagnosis of the Indian economy and its social order. To give an example of this lot, the name of Raghuram Rajan comes to mind. This was a generation that grew up with the all-embracing Hindu rate of growth, and today it is most uncomfortable with the country's new rate of growth. At the same time, the Westerner was also passing through an evolutionary world that was redefining the social order. In the new world, it was almost sacrilege to say anything against the black and the Islamic community. That was socially taboo, especially in these woke times. And yet, a part of the Western mind always seeks an antagonist, an enemy to vent spleen. Who better than the Indians then. The Indian had the audacity to compete economically with the West. Indian academics joined hand with these forces, and they all discovered from nowhere that the Hindus were casters, elitists, racist, untrustworthy, swastika worshippers, harboring hatred for the Muslims and minority groups and communities. Seminars, symposiums were held in practically all the well-known Western universities and repeated till a time came that the word Hindu was equated with hate. The Indian academic Pravasi Bharatiya, as we call this denizen, saw to it that India would be run down in every university, media house, think tank, and not-for-profit in the West. Till a time came, as it is today, when this hate is well entrenched and all-pervasive, especially in the universities and in the outpourings of media content in both print and video. This hatred also spun off, impacting Indians at other ends. Suddenly, in many Western countries, especially the Scandinavian countries, Indian parenting came under a cloud. The age-old comforting Indian practices of sleeping with the newly born to give it comfort, feeding the child with hands to give a human touch, and even occasionally scolding the child to prevent the child from picking bad habits was deemed as abusive behavior. Indian children were picked up by social services in these countries and separated from their parents on orders of Western-style kangaroo child services codes, deliberately choosing to ignore compassionate Indian practices and upholding grim, clinical Western ones. This divergence of thinking has snowballed in a clash of two sets of values, antithetical to each other, which is grim in its scope and on the same scale as the hatred unleashed against the Jews pre-Second World War. And the worst part of it is that our very own so-called educated Indians started the fire in the first place. And so on this note, I come to the end of this episode of the CAA Show. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. If you like our show, do subscribe to us. And on this note, it's goodbye and cheers from my end.